Hello, welcome to Insight Live, IT Experts Take. My name's Mike Moore, your host for today, as we talk about protecting digital assets and specifically modern threats and how we can mitigate them. So we've got a panel of experts joining me today. One pretty regular face that shows up on here, Mr. Jeremy Nelson, our CISO of North America and leader of advisory services, and a couple new faces, Mike Cicero, who is a senior architect here at Insight, background in network and security. Mike and I have spent many years as boots on the ground and helping clients with pre-sales. So great to see you on the call. And Mr. Andrew Atkinson from INSURICA Southwest, managing partner and business insurance professional from INSURICA. So I think we've got a pretty well-rounded team today for the discussion we're going to have. And if you're joining at home live, I do want to remind you, you do have the ability to say hello, post comments, questions in the chat as we go. We will see those on the screen so we can answer those real time. So if there's any burning questions you have, feel free to put them out there and happy to get those answered for you. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. This seemed to be a pretty popular topic. Mike and Andrew have done a little bit of a road show, going out and getting in front of some clients, talking about modern threats and cybersecurity, how cyber insurance plays a role. So Mike, let's start with you. And what's really resonating with the folks you're talking to? What are you seeing with clients as what's really common and emerging threats out in the threatscape today that our clients are concerned about?
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for hosting too. So one of the things that we really want to think about is how the landscape of network security is changing to 10 years ago, and how we have to rethink how we apply network security, how we think about how we do our architectures, and how we actually really think about where we have security points within our network. So one of the emerging things, right, is just the number of connected devices. And what I like to think about is anything that's connected to the network, anything that has internet access. Each one of these devices is a risk. They're a risk footprint. And the more of these types of devices expand any organization's risk footprint. And by 2030, we predict that there's going to be 50 billion connected devices. So this is the explosion of IoT. Everything needs to be connected to function. We have less and less control about what has network access in our organization, and each one of those is increasing any organization's risk. And that's giving them the ability to have more liability when it comes to cybersecurity, and also thinks about how they bypass their traditional security checkpoints about how all these and where all these types of devices are connected. So that's a lot of things where I focus on my conversations with customers is, hey, you really have to think about your network security, your network security architecture, because of the changing landscape of endpoints and applications.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, the hype around AI too is becoming a real thing, and advanced threat tactics that are coming through, AI being used for bad and for good. Actually, from our Foundry survey that we put out this year for the digital transformation where IT leaders stand. So you touched on it around cybersecurity modernization initiatives. IoT and endpoints remain a top focus. Around half of companies are looking at how they can secure that, as well as edge protection platforms. So making sure that perimeter is secure, but also where those endpoints are connecting. So extremely important. And the threat with AI, whether it's real threat or perceived, I mean, 89% of our decision leaders that we surveyed are looking to bolster their cybersecurity strategies and initiatives to really strengthen and shore up what they have in place today to protect from those more advanced threats. And Jeremy, I know you're out there in the field talking with clients all the time, in the C-suite even. So what are you seeing? What are some of the risks that are top of mind for them, and how are they really looking to protect themselves from these modern threat vectors?
Yeah, I think Mike did a great job of highlighting, really as we think about the explosion of IoT and OT devices, the number of things that are connected to the traditional infrastructures that we support is exploding, like exponential rates, like we're seeing more and more of it. And a lot of it comes back to data, right? There's a lot of these IoT, OT devices are out there and they're collecting very specific, very targeted data about the businesses and the operations of the organizations that we support. And that data is extremely valuable. You highlighted it as well, Mike, right? So we think about what is the power of AI? The power of AI is being able to take a mass set of data and to be able to draw correlations to help us find efficiencies and ways that we can accelerate, or potentially even new offerings that we would be able to develop or build out of the data that we're able to collect from the operations and work and things that are already driving today. So it really comes back to data. And so really one of the big trends that I'm seeing more and more of in the conversations that I'm having with clients is really around cloud native application protection programs, right? So it's like CNAP. And really the concept there is all about shift left, shift left, shift left, right? So it's really trying to move as much of the actual cybersecurity best practices as far left into the entire. I don't necessarily want to call it it does center traditionally around SecOps, which is very app dev centric. However, if we think about that more broadly, right? Like if we think about shift left, so that people are thinking about cybersecurity through every element of business development stages, right? So as you're thinking about developing a new aspect of the business, or you're looking to grow, or you're looking to mine information from an existing segment, how are we making sure that cybersecurity is as far left in that conversation as it possibly can be? And really, a lot of those principles are ensuring that we've got those different elements along the journey covered from a cybersecurity standpoint, everything from identity and endpoint, and then, how do we then secure the code? How do we then secure the infrastructure? How do we then secure the workload? So just really embracing that full journey of cybersecurity from inception through implementation and then ongoing operations and maintenance.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's a maturity journey. Everyone's going to be at a different phase, and especially when you start getting into the multi-cloud conversation and CNAP, which is pretty new term out there. So I'm glad you brought that one up. I would encourage folks to go take a look at that because that is pretty interesting. And so I want to come back to some of that, Jeremy. I'm going to put it on the back burner for a second because I do want to introduce the
too far too fast. It's
no
typical.
Yeah,
typical Jeremy
we're just
fashion.
dipping a toe in the water right now. We don't want to dive straight in, so we'll get there. So I want to, before we get too deep, let's talk a little bit with Andrew about cyber liability insurance and what that is. So as we start diving into these concepts a little more, we have that umbrella of what we're talking about from an insurance perspective. So what is cyber liability insurance? What does it cover? What does it not cover, Andrew?
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to be with my friends from Insight. So in its most basic definition, cyber liability insurance is the insurance policy that provides businesses with a combination of coverage and options that protects against different things. In this case, cyber liability crimes, cyber liability hacking, ransomware, all kinds of different things. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but it's important to go back. I think about when I got started in this 16 years ago, we never talked about cyber liability. I'm an insurance broker. That means that I help businesses protect themselves with workers' compensation, general liability, automobile, all the things that people know that businesses have to buy. Cyber liability never came up. And when it first started coming up, anybody over the age of 35 will remember that the first cyber liability crimes or the phishing attempts, we now call them, was usually from an email from some prince from some foreign country, and all they needed was your bank account number so that they could wire you $24 million that you never knew that you had because you were the 11th generation heir to the king. They've come a long way since then. And when we first started talking about cyber liability coverage from an insurance broker standpoint, we didn't have all the different methodologies, all the different entry points, all the different crimes that we now have with the ransomware, the malware, and we've seen so many changes made in the industry with multi-factor authentication and all the different things that companies have to do to even buy cyber liability insurance. But at its most basic level, the thing I always like to reiterate is that it is reactionary. So my friends on the screen from Insight, they're all in the exciting part of this, I think, which is on the preventative and the proactive measures to help businesses, help people get protected on the front end, running the different tests and penetration testing and vulnerability testing, all the different things that I can't even speak intelligently to. And then insurance, the world that I'm in, we come in, we're useful after something has already gone wrong. So in the perfect world, and I know we don't live in one, but if we did, in a perfect world, what I do for a living, at least with cyber liability insurance, would never be needed because everything would be stopped on the front end. That is a long definition or long answer to your short question, what is cyber liability insurance? But I do think it's important just to give a little bit of history on the fact that this is something that a decade ago, people that do what I do for a living, we weren't even talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you deal with a lot of business owners, Andrew, and I mean, the stuff that Mike and Jeremy were talking about when it comes to the actual breach or a cyber event, what are the most common types that you're seeing and dealing with? Is it the ransomware, malware? What has it really been recently and over the past couple of years?
Well, phishing has always been popular. Phishing scams, email fraud that involves techniques like deceptive emails and website scams, misleading communications. That's never going to go away. We've seen a lot of, so I work with a lot of businesses that work with other businesses that I also insure, whether that be like a general contractor that's working with a subcontractor. We're starting to see a lot of fake invoices show up, the emails that are sent from somebody who appears to be the owner or the CEO of a company saying, we switched banks and our new routing number is below, please send it to this new bank in Delaware. And it's amazing. I'm privy to a lot of these and I see them and I look at it myself and I think, how could anybody ever fall for this? But then you look in the email, the subject line, or you look in the sender's address and there's just one little period that's moved, or there's an I that's moved into an L. So we see a lot of that. Identity theft. Obviously, we see that in almost every business, whether that's on the consumer level where consumer data is being stolen through access. Like Mike talked a lot about this when we did our last presentation. It was very interesting how the hackers got into a large company was actually like through the HVAC system. It wasn't even through the computers. People were fascinated by that. Malware, ransomware. Again, 10 years ago, it was the prince from a foreign country. And today, I can't even, it's like I'm in this accidental career that I never got into for cyber. And now it's become so much of what we do in a disturbing way.
Right. Yeah. It's funny, the Prince conversation. Sorry, Mike. And this is probably way off topic, but I think it's hilarious because I just saw a meme the other day and it was $45 billion stacked in somebody's apartment, and it said some Saudi prince is flat because no one ever responded to his email. So I thought that was extremely relevant, and we did not plan that, but it cracks me up, Andrew.
You need to send that to me. I want that.
I can pick that up and send it over.
That's awesome.
I think one thing that you just kind of highlighted there, Andrew, that I'd like to lean in on a little bit is like even over your tenure, just the way that it's evolved. And that it's nowhere near stopping, right? Like I think you would probably say that every week, or I would say every month, every week, maybe even every day, we're starting to see things changing in the way that we approach cybersecurity insurance, because the way that these threat actors are behaving, the ways that they are exploiting organizations continue to evolve. Like again, we went from Saudi prince to fake invoices. And then I think a lot of us have heard of the story around the deep fake, where we had a CFO who was calling somebody in finance and was able to, via very legitimate communications, both vocal as well as video, fool somebody into transferring tens of thousands of dollars, like just initiating a wire transfer instantaneously. So it's really just the next evolution of what you just talked about. And we just continue to see that change. Like I would love your perspective, like what, like if we were thinking about it, like size, like when you look at your overall portfolio and you're talking about how you found yourself accidentally in cybersecurity insurance, like how much of your portfolio is now cybersecurity as opposed to traditional workman's comp? And do you see that growing and changing?
Yeah, my answer will really surprise you, maybe not you guys because you're in this business, but it's really been mind-blowing to me. And I made the bold prediction about a year or two ago to the other people in my office that cyber liability, not only in its sheer proliferation of share of proportionally the book of business, but in cost is going to be as much as what we see in a typical general liability policy. And everybody laughed at me. And we're already seeing that. And to more clearly define that is like it's at least, so 1 out of 10, we'll say, because cyber liability is an optional coverage, okay? A lot of coverages for businesses are not optional. Like if you run a business in Arizona or anywhere in America, you're required to buy general liability, you're required to buy workers' compensation if you have employees. There's a number of things that you are required to buy to operate. Cyber liability is not one of them, at least not yet. It's optional. What that means is a business owner has to look at the cost and then weigh the options and say yes or no. I'm going to go on my own, or I'm going to buy the coverage. 10 years ago, 1 out of 10 business owners would get it. Today, it's 8 out of 10, and the 2 out of 10 that don't, we have them sign a form that we talked about it and we explained it. So there's something happens, they can't come back and say, well, Andrew never talked with us about that, because that's how common it is. But the other part of your question, kind of the beginning part there that you were talking about, Jeremy, with the changes, one of the things that's been so interesting and created this accidental career for me is, as an independent insurance broker who works with all the different insurance carriers, it's hard for us to keep up with which carriers are offering what, because a lot of carriers got into the cyber liability game, let's just call it, and they're already out of it, because after 2 or 3 multi-million-dollar ransom payments, they just said this isn't profitable, for a $10,000 premium or a $100,000 premium, because that's part of what cyber liability covers in most cases, is the ransom payment itself. Now, why did I say most cases? Well, to further confuse it, every carrier that writes cyber liability coverage uses their very own manuscript form, meaning they can make it say and cover whatever they want it to, and they can leave out whatever they want it to. And that's the kind of stuff you find through exclusions on page 39 of a policy. It's why people hate insurance.
Yeah.
And so it's really created a tremendous amount of confusion, which we all know, when there's confusion, there's opportunity. But it's been such an interesting circus to follow, because every time we think we've kind of got a good handle on it, just from our perspective, the carriers will make a big change, or the criminals will come up with a new crime. And that's why it's been so awesome working with Insight over the years. It's just like, you guys do the part that helps prevent my part from ever needing to be used. But we know these guys are always one step ahead of us. The bad guys are always one step ahead. So we're just trying to keep up.
It's a never-ending battle. And I mean, we started to allude to it right there, but when we start thinking about cyber insurance, proactive versus reactive, I mean, ultimately, if a breach does happen or an incident, there's going to be a cost associated with that, right? And that can vary. And I know, Mike, you had talked about in the lunch and learns that you've done around costs associated with cyber attack. And I know, Jeremy, you've been involved in some incident response for clients. I'll start with Mike and then maybe go to Jeremy. What are some of the costs that people may be thinking about that are associated, but what are some of the hidden costs that are also associated with a cyber attack?
Yeah, so based on the data, it's surprising that the actual post-breach response is only less than 20% of the cost of a typical cyber incident. The majority of the cost is around notification. So you may be, depending on what industry you're in, you are going to have regulations that require you to notify when data is lost, customer data is breached, systems are compromised. And then also the thing that is always hidden and a lot of times hard to calculate is what was the loss to your business? Like if you're a manufacturing site and you had to lose manufacturing for a week or 2 weeks, what was the actual cost of that business? I mean, any business that sort of was mostly manufacturing, that would be significant to the percentage of it. So, the actual response, like hiring somebody to come in and clean up your data or secure your systems or reset your passwords, that's a very small fraction of the cost of any cybersecurity event based on the data. And so it's really interesting to think about, like, if a cybersecurity event, what are they going to need to insure from a premium to cover the cost of notifications, of loss of business, and even paying a ransom, right? That's the kind of thing that's easy to monetize. Like, hey, you got to pay a ransom. But
Right.
these are things that, really kind of get lost on, the impact of cybersecurity events.
Yeah, Jeremy,
So-
anything to add there?
Oh, I do. This one's near and dear to my heart. And as you mentioned, Mike, I have had both the unfortunate and fortune of supporting some clients as they've gone through a variety of different incident response efforts. And I think one of the things that often doesn't necessarily get considered is the impact and cost on your human capital.
Yeah.
For anyone who's actually gone through a cybersecurity incident response effort, it is brutal. It is taxing and I think most organizations will say, what's your greatest asset? And you'll say, it's our people, right? It's those people that will literally throw themselves at the bus in order to be able to try and right size and to get the organization back up and on its feet and to eradicate that cybersecurity event. But at the same time, your best talent are going to be the ones that are going to get burned out quickly. These are long, drawn out efforts. People working 24/7. It's not a day. Like most of these events, if you go and you look at the statistics, it's usually like multiple weeks. And when you think
Yeah.
about what that does to your human capital, when you think about like your team in there working under probably some of the most intense um, escalated situations, right? Like it's almost oh man, I'm just the word's eluding me at the moment. But basically, it's extremely intense. And so not
Yeah.
only do you have just tremendous pressure on you, you're working unreasonable hours. Everyone's fighting for the life of the company. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times is we'll see organizations who don't have a good strategy on how to supplement their own team with external support to get them through a recovery effort. What do we
Yeah.
see happen is on the back end of this is there's a tremendous attrition event, is that your top talent gets burned out. They don't necessarily feel recognized. They usually there are certain situations that led up to they probably were vocal about implementing security policies or tooling that could have prevented it, and they almost feel like they've been abandoned by their organization. And so what ends up happening there from a cost standpoint is that you lose that top talent, and then you have to go through the exercise of rehiring. And usually if you're rehiring, you're paying more for that talent. You've also lost productivity over a period of time. And I think that's really like the hidden cost
Yeah.
associated with cybersecurity events. Like you can go down to the dollars and cents, but that one, because it's really hard to recreate a culture also
Oh,
if you
yeah.
go through that type of a human resources event at the end of a cybersecurity response.
Yeah, that was great, both Mike and Jeremy. So I mean, obviously there's costs that are known, costs that are hidden that you kind of talked about, the pros and cons of being proactive versus reactive. When we were talking with Andrew a little earlier, and I'm going to steal his quote because I really like it. I'm not going to give him the opportunity, but so cyber liability insurance is like wearing a seatbelt, right? It doesn't prevent the crash. The seatbelt doesn't prevent the crash, right? And cyber insurance doesn't prevent the attack. So we got to make sure that we're shoring ourselves up front and also making sure that we're backed up in the event that something does happen where we can recoup those costs, right? And Andrew, I think you touched on it a little. When you get cyber liability insurance, what exactly does that cover? It's probably not going to be all the tooling, putting the policies, procedures, everything in place. It's more around the cyber incident or cyber attack, right?
Yes, and I'm going to answer that by incorporating some of what Jeremy just talked about because that's so relevant. And I think the word you were looking for there, Jeremy, when you were describing the toll on the employees was either therapy or interrogation, because I've seen it too. So yeah, the ransom payment covered almost all the time. The attack itself, the cost to restore the business interruption is what it's called on line 17 that Michael talked about. Typically that's in there. A lot of times there's PR firms that can help paint over something and make it look better in the press if it's a very high profile business, and that cost will be covered or it won't, but it's clearly defined in the policy. So when I sit down with a business owner who's about ready to get cyber insurance, we usually have 3 or 4 different options. They all cost a different amount and they all have different things in them, and that's my job to go through what each one covers, what they don't. That's why my clients always say, with insurance, it's complicated, it's riddled with acronyms, it's confusing, but at least it's expensive.
Yeah.
And so, but I love Jeremy's part there because he could say everything he just said in that part in my chair talking to my clients, because the reputational damage, I'll call it, that is not anywhere to be found, because that's not quantifiable, it's not measurable, it's not tangible, it's very hard to measure that. And so when you talk about reputational damage, or when you talk about the morale, the hit on the morale, the people who were there that said, look, we really should do something and we didn't, and then they're brought through this whole interrogation or therapy or we'll think of some other adjective. That is nowhere to be found in the policy. Those are just very ambiguous numbers that are difficult to quantify. And so, but they matter. They matter. They matter a lot. And we don't have to go into the reasons why they matter, because everybody that's in business knows the cost, knows there's a huge cost to all those different kinds of things, from replacement to whatever.
Right.
But at the most basic level, the insurance policies are typically going to cover the cost of the event and or the ransom, what happened. Most of them are going to cover some data restoration costs. Most of them are going to cover loss of business income, or business interruption, we call it. And then from there, it just spreads out really thin depending on the carrier. And we could do a whole part 2 on just the carrier part. I don't recommend it. It wouldn't be exciting, but you could spend at least an hour just on that.
We can do that late at night when someone's trying to fall asleep and want to get into the details on page 39, like you were talking about earlier. So, I mean, we covered a lot, a little bit of doom and gloom. So I think we should start looking at the sunny horizon, what we can do, what you can do to shore up your security strategy. So Mike, in your presentation that you've been doing, you've talked about some cybersecurity tool sets and best practices that you'd recommend, from phish resistant MFA, zero trust, asset management, knowing what you have. Can you talk about where folks can start with kind of that almost the zero trust mindset to really be more proactive, where once they have the cyber liability, they've got the nice umbrella, but how do we get them prepared so that they're putting their best foot forward?
Yeah, so I really think the key when you talk about your security strategy and your networking strategy is to think about risk mitigation, right? The sad truth is nobody is going to be able to prevent every type of attack in an organization. Doesn't matter the best tools that you have, the alerting, prevention systems are in place. If you have connected devices, you have a risk, you have an attack vector, and you could be succumb to phishing or ransomware or malware event. What the key is from a network design, and what we try to stress to our customers is mitigating the attack vector. So when you connect things, applications, users, and devices to your network, you put those into logical zones that are really small, that if those devices, applications get compromised, they do not affect the broader business. And that's how we really try to think about network security. We call it shrinking the zones of trust. And things that we want to see customers do from a preventative measure to reduce risk is ensure identity is correct with MFAs. Certainly know your hardware and security, right? That helps you know where your risk vectors are, right? If you have software on your network that is out of date, that has known vulnerabilities. The other thing that we talk about is what's your incident response plan? Like I said, we probably can't prevent every attack from happening with the best security technology. But if you have an incident response plan, it's going to certainly help you reduce the cost and reduce the impact to your organization if you're able to react quickly and efficiently. Zero trust architecture, we talked about that. That is shrinking your zones of trust within your network. So attacks can't necessarily break out the broader business. Follow common frameworks, right? NIST, CNAP. These are things that are going to be great for your organization. These are proven frameworks that organizations should be following. And then of course, just do risk assessments on yourself. Right? That's something that is easily done, just to give a third party view of what you think your risks are versus what somebody else who might be an expert to think what your risks are.
Right. Yeah, I love it. Jeremy, anything you want to add on that? And then I think we'll try to close it up. We're getting towards the end here. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how to reduce risk, what some of the good strategies are, where our clients could start if they're concerned, and go.
Yeah, boy, it's tough to add on. I think Mike did a phenomenal job
He did
of
a pretty good
covering
job.
almost everything, right? Like everything from risk assessment to incident response plan. I think incident response plans right now, especially when we think about that, right? Because an incident isn't necessarily just cybersecurity. I think this is something that benefits every organization, is it really is crisis response. There's a lot of different things that could instantiate a crisis, whether that be natural disaster, whether that be geopolitical, whether that be cybersecurity, right? And so we see these things happen, and making sure that you've got your ducks in a row, that you know how to manage communications, both internal and external, around crisis management, that you can kind of have backup processes and procedures on how to continue operations forward in absence of certain systems or tooling or people. So I think that's the biggest one, incident response plans. But the big thing that I would have, not just having it, committing to refreshing it regularly. And the biggest one above all of that is practice. Like, it's not just good enough to just write it down on a piece of paper and check a box and be like, good, we got incident response. We can now send this to our cybersecurity insurer and we get a discount on our premium, right? Like, if you're not practicing it, you're not taking full advantage of what the incident response plan really means. And that's bringing everybody together. And it's not just a matter of practicing, but it's also red teaming. It's also leveraging the collective knowledge base of your entire organization to understand, where do we have gaps? Like, as we run through this, we found out, oh, we totally forgot about this particular group or this particular system. And we need to make sure that we incorporate that into the plan and just continue to evolve and mature that over time, because most companies have stopped saying if. Like, you can do all the preventative maintenance that you want. It's no longer if. You can't, like Andrew said, the bad guy is just find a way to get one step ahead. So it's no longer going to be if, it's going to be when. And so when that day does come, you know, you want it to be just muscle memory. The plan goes into action, you execute, and you're able to recover the business as quickly as possible.
Yeah, love it. And Andrew, Mike, and Jeremy both covered a lot of things there. And I'm assuming if you're crossing your I's, dotting your T's, you have good strategy in place. You're doing these CIS assessments and assessing, pen testing, tabletop exercises. These are going to help when it comes to insurability, when it comes to cyber liability. So would love to get your final thoughts, anything that you'd like to share, that if someone's thinking about going down the cyber liability insurance path, what should be top of mind for them? And then we'll go ahead and wrap things up.
So the answer to that is yes. Those things absolutely help. And in fact, they're becoming required. So when you hear 10 years ago, multi-factor authentication, nobody knew what multi-factor authentication was. Now you can't even begin to fill out a cyber liability coverage application unless you can prove that you're using that. So the best way for a business to equip yourself to avoid a cyber attack is to meet with my friends at Insight and to know where you're vulnerable and where the holes can be plugged, and to address all that from a technical perspective. When it comes to the insurance part, it's getting to the point where all the different carriers that I work with, which is all of them, at a bare minimum, they require things now that even 3 years ago, and certainly not 10 years ago, they would never ask about, in terms of protective measures that are in place ahead of time before these insurance carriers will even offer pricing. I didn't even say competitive pricing. I just said before they'll even offer it at all, there's so many things they need to do. And so it's very wise for everybody to go through that business physical, you could call it, from a cyber perspective, because that is the only way to be able to get cyber liability coverage if anybody's interested in getting that.
Awesome.
I think we got our tagline for this session: get your business physical.
Yeah. Cyber physical. Cyber physical.
Cyber physical. There you go.
All right, new branding campaign. We'll have to talk to the marketing team about that after this. Well, that was a great discussion, guys. I think we scratched the surface. We got pretty deep, and then we came back up. We could probably talk about an hour for this, and as Andrew mentioned, part 2 if we want to get into the T's and C's of everything. But great conversation. I really appreciate all of you coming on today. Andrew, for spending time with us from INSURICA. Jeremy, I know your time's very valuable, as well as Cicero. So appreciate it all. And if those listening in live or listen to this later have any questions or want to follow up, you can find us at insight.com. Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.